Hey guys, good evening. Welcome to our combination live stream tonight. We're doing X Spaces, and then we're live streaming to you tonight live on Rumble, on YouTube, on X, of course, and on Instagram. Great conversation ready tonight for the next half hour. We'll be talking with Mario Nawfal. Mario, I'm just going to bring you straight into this conversation because our time is short, and it's great to have you here. You and I have never actually done one of these together before, so it's great to actually be able to talk to you. But so much has been happening with the Epstein stuff, and you've been so on top of it, covering this thing, I mean, incredibly well. Just want to get kind of your insights into where we stand right now and how you feel about the process so far of covering this Epstein story. How huge of a story is it?
This is probably the best cover-up of our generation. They've done it so well. I think most people don't know. We've seen the files that are very twisted, very incriminating. We've seen images being sent with the email subject saying 12 years old or 14 years old. And we've got a lot of redacted images. We can't put the pieces together. But most people, the list goes on. Did you torture her? Everyone's seen that email says, did you torture her? But what most people don't know is that we're only seeing a tiny slither of what's out there. The Channel 4 investigation found out that the files that the DOJ has, 6 million of them approximately, they've released half. And out of those half, a lot of them have been redacted. But that 6 million only represents 2% of the total files that the FBI initially confiscated from Epstein. 2%. That means that 98% of what the FBI confiscated, according to Channel 4, we have no idea about. And then don't forget, Epstein had files stashed in multiple locations. And we also found out recently, according to Drop Site News, that at least in one of Epstein's properties, it was Israeli intelligence that set up the surveillance. So that means there could be Israeli intelligence, the CIA that has a lot of that footage as well. So we're barely seeing a slither of what the DOJ has, which is a slither of what the FBI had initially, which could be a slither of what Epstein has or had initially.
Yeah, it's a great point. When you're talking about the 2%, that's a reference to the amount of data there is, right? So I think it's something like 14 terabytes of data that's out there, and I think they've released like 300 gigabytes of it, which, part of that's because they've released mostly emails, and then the emails, of course, as you mentioned, are all redacted. You get to 14 terabytes, what does that consist of? Well, that's a lot of video, right, that they have not shown us. And we also know there was actually a huge mistake that was made. I'm sure you've seen this, but a lot of these files that were PDF and marked PDF actually aren't PDFs. They were mislabeled. They're actually MP4s, and you can go in and type in some of these, the same link, and then you change the PDF to a .mp4, and you can see these now redacted videos, which are horrifying in a lot of cases. We heard today Nancy Mace talking about the fact, the Congresswoman talking about the fact that the Justice Department said they're done, right? They're not going to prosecute anyone. They've made that very clear. They're not going to charge anyone. They're not going to investigate anyone. That they're done with the story and they're ready to move on. But every single day, Mario, new stuff comes out. There's new emails that people read, new information, and you know what it seems like to me is it gets more explicit. Right? I've heard people say things like, well, he wasn't really trafficking, or Kash Patel, the FBI director, at one point said in front of Congress, he said, well, he was trafficking to no one, which is obviously nonsense, because how can you traffic to no one? But then we see emails that came out even just this week, right, where we're seeing the emails that say, where Epstein's talking about this girl who was horrified to find out that he's the bad man who takes children to his island for sex. And so it feels like the more that comes out, the less defensible it is to not either investigate or prosecute.
Yeah, the problem, though, is that they've released everything at once. They've muddied the water to such an extent where you've got things that are really meaningless. They've just been released. They've redacted faces that don't need to be redacted. And what that does is, the things that is incriminating is just lost between everything else. And there's just so much incriminating and bizarre stuff in the files. Like I was going through one earlier in the week from the Zorro Ranch. Someone sending out an extortion email to Epstein's estate in 2019. And in that extortion email, so usually when you want to extort someone, you say, look, if you claim you have certain footage, You want to offer evidence that you have that footage. Do you want to show screenshots, maybe small snippets? That's how extortion actually works. And in that email, the extortion email, we don't know who the sender is redacted. That actually includes 7 attachments. And in those attachments, it's called sex video with minor, threesomes, underage girl sex video, underage girl Matthew Mellon video. Everyone knows Matthew Mellon, the billionaire. Rape fantasy video, underage girl, and one called Girl from Bay Area Suicide Attempt, Confession to Madam Ghislaine Maxwell. Yeah. So they've offered 7 attachments in that email. Again, that's to extort Epstein's estate. And what they claim is that Epstein, they know about 2 bodies that Epstein has at the Zorro Ranch, which is finally being investigated. So all this, the shit that we considered a conspiracy theory just a few months ago, is showing up in those emails. And it's not an overstatement to say, that's why I keep covering it. And despite what's happening in Iran, despite what happened in Mexico, I continue covering this as my priority because it's just worse than any of us expected, or at least worse than I expected.
I think it is worse in a lot of ways. As you know, I've been talking about this issue for about 10 years and trying to get people to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And it's worse than I thought it would be. Even though there were a lot of signs. What's the saying they like to say? There were signs, right? There were signs it was this bad. There were signs that it was this disturbing. There were signs that it's ritualistic, satanic, that it involves cannibalism. There were signs of all of it. But I think what we're finding is the more you get into these emails, the more explicit it becomes. It's one thing to be able to say, well, yeah, but that's crazy, or that's too far, or maybe it's not quite that bad. And then every time I think that somebody would make that case, maybe it's not that bad, you get another email that's as clear as possible. I mean, the list you just read, right, of these titles, there's no deniability here. This is very clear what's going on and what's being said. But we're also watching the number of names that I guess are starting to leak out. There are some. In the UK, there have been a couple of arrests. We know Lord Mandelson was arrested. What actually happens with it, we'll see. Prince Andrew was arrested. What actually happens with it, we'll see. To be arrested is one thing. You get let go immediately, and are they ever actually charged? And can you even make a case, right? I think there's a lot of questions there. But I think for a lot of people who have been following this, there's just a frustration with the fact that it's not just that no one's being investigated, it seems like here, or prosecuted here. It's that there was a lot of hope that this particular administration would be the one to do it. There was a higher expectation here, especially when people like Kash Patel, before he became the FBI director, talked openly and publicly about the need to go after the Epstein list. Release the Epstein list, he said on Glenn Beck's show, right? That would be the number one thing he would do. That Trump, when he was running, said it. Other people wouldn't even talk about it. At least these people talked about it when they were on their way into power, and then they got there and it was like, shut it all down. And I think that's gotta be part of the level of frustration for a lot of people here.
Not only frustration, I think it should be scary as well. For someone like Kash Patel, who was so dedicated to release the Epstein files before coming to office, and to not be part of the cover-up, it just makes me wonder who's really behind it and who Epstein really was. And for someone like Lutnick to just lie about visiting the island, Lutnick lied about visiting the island with his family. It shows how toxic and, how much worse is it that people that might have not done anything don't want to even be related to it. And another thing that's concerning is that everything we're seeing, we talked about the 2% that might include a lot of footage that the DOJ, that the FBI confiscated that we don't have, that hasn't been released. We also know that Epstein was able to hide a lot of that data or destroy a lot of that data. But also remember, man, that what we're seeing right now is mostly emails. If they're, the incriminating stuff sent via email must have been accidental. So it gives you an idea of how much was discussed in person via calls, via text messages, via disappearing messages. Because they were being very careful. We know about all the code words. We know about the pizza and grape soda, the beef jerky, the cheese. And all about code words with your coverage 10 years ago. So these guys were very careful in trying to hide their tracks, which makes you wonder if this is the stuff that we're seeing in the emails, and with that shocked and it's worse than expected. Yeah. What was discussed in these phone calls many years ago?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, right? And you talked about the code words. The code language obviously is something that's been used for a long time, much longer than just 10 years, right? It's been going on for maybe 20, 30 years that this type of language has been used. And certainly with the advent of the internet, chat rooms on the internet is really where it originates from. In a lot of cases, this is how they would communicate online with each other. Pedophiles would. But what we also see is the attempts, the very careful attempts to code the language in some cases, but then to your point, in some of the emails you were reading, and in other cases, they're not hiding it at all. They're very explicit about the way they talk about this to each other. And that's where I think then you see it's more, it seems like a honey trap, right? Where, okay, to certain people, I'm going to speak in code. And to certain people, I'm just going to say exactly what it is. And I feel like there's a part of that process. We reported today on the fact that one of the things that's not getting a lot of coverage, maybe it got more coverage when Epstein, committed suicide or was killed, however we want to phrase that, because clearly he didn't commit suicide. But whether he's even dead, I think is a big question too at this point. But when we watch that, the issue of him being an intelligence asset, working with Mossad or working with the CIA, which clearly he was working with at both of them, but that got more coverage before. Since these files have come out, since there's more information coming out, it feels like that part of the conversation is being discussed less. And the intelligence agencies at least seem to be doing a good job of kind of erasing that part of the narrative, erasing that part of the story. And I think it's such an important part of the story because it's how Epstein was funded. It's how he was able to have the access he had, not just to the finances and the kind of acts with impunity, but also to the people he had access to via those intelligence agencies. Do you think that eventually, in a as this story moves forward, that part of it will get completely lost to people, the intelligence part?
I think people have learned to accept it. What people shouldn't accept, though, is the impunity that intelligence offers. I'm not sure if you saw Epstein's former lawyer Dershowitz on Piers Morgan's show, and he said very openly, he said, "Look, if I knew whether he's being honest or not, it's up to you to determine whether Dershowitz knew that Epstein was intelligence." But he said on Pierce's show, he said, "If I knew, or if Epstein told me he was intelligence, he was Mossad or CIA, I would have not even gotten him any jail time, let alone a sweetheart deal for what he's done, for all the charges that he was facing." So that's something that we're way past that. And I think people are trying to piece all the information together and find out how deep does that go and who else was implicated. So I think this, let's call it a witch hunt, will continue because a lot of innocent people are thrown into this as well. I think it will continue for months and years to come. But I worry that people just move on and accept it as reality. I was talking, today is the anniversary of the Ukraine war. Said today, 4 years ago, is when Russia invaded Ukraine. I made a post. I said, we've accepted that as a new normal, and that's scary. 2, 3, 4 years ago, everyone was talking about the risk of a nuclear war. Well, Putin and his administration are now talking about the risk of nuclear weapons, and the news doesn't even talk about it because this is the new normal. I worry that what we're seeing with Epstein right now is the new normal, and I'm seeing content out there already that says, who's the next Epstein? I want to tell people this isn't a normal that we should accept. And I think if we continue not letting ourselves get distracted by everything else we see in the news, maybe we get to the bottom of this. But I'm not hopeful, man. I really don't think we'll be able to get the full truth, at least not in our lifetime or when we're much older. Me and you are much older.
Yeah, I think there's truth to that. And I also think that one of the things that does happen is that while people are still alive, it's hard for a lot of folks to accept that this is reality, right? That this is really happening. This is what it really looks like. And then I think what happens is 20 years from now, 30 years from now, a lot of the older people who are associated with Epstein are all dead. And then it comes out, oh, actually, this person was this thing, and they did do this thing. Because now it's safe, right? It's safe to talk about them because it's the monster who is no longer with us. And those terrible people back then did terrible things. But guess what? Those people aren't around anymore. So those terrible things aren't happening. I think there's a cognitive dissonance that happens with people where when those people are not just still alive, but are still powerful, are still in positions of finance, politics, banking, Hollywood, whatever it might be, right? Music, because those people are still in those positions, we can't accept that it can be true. because what we're accepting is the idea that these people still have power over us. And so we have to believe that no, it's not until they're gone, until it changes, right, that we can accept that. So I think that's one of the other realities, is that in the future, our kids, our grandkids may know the truth about more of these people than we will know, because it will be safer to let it out. And it's also safer to say, but look, at least they're gone now. Those terrible people who once did terrible things, but now we've evolved beyond that.
Yeah. And that worries me. I want to go back to the code words. I was watching one of your videos from a long time ago, and there's a lot of similarities between what we saw with Epstein and the Pizzagate. And what do you make of those words? What do you make of Epstein and people around him using the word soda? May I bring a slice of pizza to you? Another one, Freeney asked me about a pizza party this weekend. From your experience covering this, covering the Pizzagate scandal, if I asked you to define those words, what would you say they are?
Well, specifically, okay, so the code words, according to FBI, if you go back to the Pizzagate investigation, right? Cheese pizza, CP, is the overarching term that would be used by pedophiles. So CP is an acronym, child pornography or child porn, CP, cheese pizza. And then out of that, the FBI had decoded a whole series of words that were then kind of born out of that. So, sauce is one word, hot dog means a young boy, pizza slice or just pizza would be a young girl. And so they would have different words. Now, some of the words that have come up in the Epstein thing are new to me. They were not part of that. So, like, for instance, grape soda, no idea what it means, no idea what it represents, because I'd never actually seen that one. Beef jerky is a new one as well. But the jerky one is different, too, because I think jerky is representative of the cannibalism. When you start to read, and we did a whole piece about the cannibal stuff that was coming out with it. The thing about the jerky thing, if you go back and read the Epstein emails about jerky, they're bizarre. Nobody talks about jerky like this, right? Because he's not just talking about eating beef jerky. He never has enough. He's insatiable for it, and he can never purchase it. It always has to be provided. So if you read the emails, he never asks anyone to buy it for him. He never references buying it. He only references people who specially make it, or people who are having to fly it to him, or people who are having to ship it to him, right? But it's never like, can somebody make a run to the Quick Trip and get me some beef jerky? It's this person specially making it for me, this person's sitting it, or I've tried to make it myself and I didn't like the way it turned out. His jerky references, and by the way, there's 382 references to jerky in his emails. I've never talked about jerky, I think, in an email ever, even once in my life. Maybe some people have. Yeah. 382 times is a lot of times. So we see the code words, and Liz Crokin and I were talking about this recently. The reality is, I think Pizzagate and the coverage of that 10 years ago ended the use of the pizza terms. Because I've also noticed that the pizza terms basically disappear after the Pizzagate timeframe. They're prominent in the emails in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. You don't see them much after 2015, 2016. They kind of go away. And I think it forced the code language to change, because it was now out in the public lexicon that this is what it represented. But they use a lot of code words in their language, and it gives them, again, some plausible deniability. But I guess that's what, Mario, we have to separate. Why would they want, in some cases, to have deniability, and in other cases, they want to be as explicit as possible? And again, that goes back to the honey trapping.
Yeah, I also asked some of his victims, have they ever seen him eat pizza? Have they ever seen him eat beef jerky? All of them have said no. Either ones I've interviewed on the show or talked to privately. No one has seen him have any of those meals, or any of his co-conspirators as well. So I think the argument on, and just, that doesn't really matter. The context alone makes it obvious that these are code words. These are code words for what? And I know there's like the FBI has a terminology sheet for pedophiles, as you said, yep. Pastas, little boy, ice creams, male prostitute, etc. But I think someone like Epstein would create their own code words, and it went pretty deep. There's so many of them. Some of them, one of them is like tuna, white fish, I think was one of them. Another one, even when he was talking to the Rothschilds, there's one where Epstein sends a message to the Rothschild family who he represented. He said, "I have your cereal. Can talk tonight around 10 p.m." Um, like, imagine I told you 10 years ago, Epstein would be emailing the Rothschild family, which is probably the family that's discussed the most in the conspiracy circles,
Yep.
about cereal.
Yep.
That's where we are.
Yeah. It's the idea that the wealthiest people in the world are constantly talking about the cheapest food in the world makes no sense at all, right? They all have private chefs. They're all eating in the finest restaurants, and yet their emails are filled with conversations about beef jerky, muffins, like you said, whitefish, and
Shrimp,
pizza.
sharks. Yeah, I've got well, here, shrimps and sharks.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to the beef jerky. You've talked about cannibalism. I haven't looked into that. What have you found? Like, because that one seems pretty extreme to me, but I'm in a place now where I don't dismiss anything anymore.
Yeah. Well, okay, let me just be clear. It is extreme, right? It's a difficult thing to talk about because now you're taking another leap. But 10 years ago, when you said there are elite pedophiles, right, who are raping and trafficking young children, people are like, that's crazy. Now you say, okay, well, we've all established that that's true, but now we're saying maybe it's even further than that, and at times they were consuming people, human flesh. Oh, that's crazy. Go back and read the emails. And what you find in the emails, and I'll send you a link to our piece on it, but when you go back and look at these emails, the way it's talked about, it's very clear. They're talking about something other than actual jerky, right? Because of things like, there's one email where Jeffrey is out of jerky and he's coming back and he's very, very angry that he has no jerky when he gets back. What? Why does this warrant an email? There's an email about a friend of his who's supposed to bring jerky to him and that Jeffrey's been waiting for this. And he has enough for his next trip because he has 6 bags in the freezer. Now, I'm not an expert on beef jerky, but I'm pretty sure the whole purpose is you don't freeze beef jerky because you don't have to freeze it because that's the whole point of jerky, right? Is that it's already taken all the moisture out of it, and so it lasts without having to be frozen. Why are you freezing 6 bags of jerky? So when you start to go through those emails, it becomes very clear they're talking about consumption, which is different than the pizza because I don't want to say every time, but I'm pretty sure that in almost every description of pizza, they don't discuss eating it, right? They discuss getting pizza, having access to pizza, or sharing
a pizza party,
pizza, or having a party. They do not discuss
may I
eating.
may I bring a pizza slice to you?
Yeah.
And there's another one here where he talks about someone says to Epstein, she looks pregnant, and the person replies to Epstein, "You mean radiating a soft glow with the look of bliss and excitement?" Yeah, that's the pizza. There's all these bizarre contexts. I haven't seen one where it's about eating it. I wouldn't be surprised if the word is used in places in the right context. Because I think these are very smart people and they do want to confuse, if anyone has access to the emails, they do want to confuse them to the half plausible deniability. Say, hey, no, it's about actual pizza. Here's an email, we're talking about a pizza party. Well, we actually had a pizza party on that day. And in their mind, that would allow them to dismiss all the other mentions, the bizarre mentions of pizza, which obviously it shouldn't. These were pretty intelligent people.
Well, they are intelligent people, but I will tell you, I have not seen one yet where they actually discuss it in a context where you wouldn't say that's weird. Every single time that
maybe they're not, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're not that smart. Maybe otherwise they wouldn't be sending this stuff via email.
Well, that's a good point too. I also think, though, again, the descriptions of a lot of the food items, like I said, are rarely talked about in terms of consumption, but in terms of the jerky, it's only about consumption. And it's actually an insatiable consumption, and there's a lot of description of frustration with not having enough or running out. And also conversations about how hard it is to get it. So they treat it like jerky is a delicacy. And we know beef jerky is not, right? It's simply not. So I think there's more to that. Like I said, I'll send you a link to what we're doing on it. But when you start to really dig in on these people, what you find is, by the way, going back to the original Pizzagate story, cannibalism was a part of that story as well. And it was actually something that I avoided the first time because it was too crazy, because people couldn't even wrap their minds around what we were talking about 10 years ago. in terms of child trafficking. You really can't bring the cannibal stuff into it because that's even crazier, right? And so it's even harder to talk about. Mario, real quick, we're short on time, so I want to do this. I think we have some people on Spaces who want to jump in. Is it okay if we take a couple of those questions?
Of course, man, yeah.
All right, Joe, do we have somebody that we can bring in? Okay. While they're doing that, though, you were about to say something. So while they're connecting that, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's a killer setup that you have on your show, man. Congratulations.
Oh.
I see you a lot more energized now after you've been validated after all these years.
You know, I think that the time is right to step up and be like, listen, you know, if people keep asking me, do you feel validated? I actually don't, because 10 years ago I knew it was right. I knew the story was not flawed. The story was correct. I wish we could have done more, but sometimes you talk about something before it's time, right? And so you got to be patient and just wait. But I agree with you. The energy now is very different for me because it's time to say we're going to lean into what we've known was true, and we're going to continue to pursue to push it and to get that truth out to as many people as possible. And that's why I appreciate what you're doing. I think we have Lionel. Lionel, you want to jump in here and you have a question? Can you hear us? Apologize, we're trying to get that technology here.
Oh, but no, space is always tricky. You did mention something earlier, and it's probably something the audience should ask about, is that whether Epstein's alive. And I tried to avoid talking about that, but I had a forensic expert on the show. There's, again, so many things that are difficult to explain. Like, I still think he was killed, like someone like him. He became a liability to the various intelligence services. So I do think they killed him. But if they did kill him, then how would you answer the image that had his ear that looked very different? How would you answer the press release by the DOJ that apparently had a typo that was a date before Epstein was found dead? So you've got all these question marks that are unanswered if Epstein was actually killed. Do you believe that he was killed, Ben, or you think he managed to survive and escape?
So I think he was absolutely, if Epstein is dead, he was absolutely killed. So there's no suicide. We can take that take that off the table, right? I believe for a long time that he was killed, and I thought there was a whole, you know, the cover-up associated with that, the missing video, the fact that the guards were all asleep when it happened. But and I know you were kind of alluding to some of this too.
The inmate was removed the day before. There was a van that came in that was not signed in that had a person with an army uniform. That's all facts. That's in the Epstein files were released prior to that. You've got the autopsy report. You know, the list goes on. You've got the guard that said that Epstein was taken to the infirmary the day before, and he was chained to his wheelchair when he was taken there. The camera that filmed him attempting suicide about a week or two before, on July 23rd, that footage was deleted. So, like, the amount of evidence that he did not commit suicide is impossible to refute, and a lot more than the unanswered questions on whether he's alive.
Yeah, no question about that, right? I think, but I agree with you. There's a secondary question, which is, so is he dead at all? And I think there's a new email that's come out that shows that the FBI admits, or the Department of Corrections admits to lying about and hiding the body that was taken out. And the actual body that comes out, they used a decoy of, I think they said, boxes and pillows that they had stacked up. They moved it out in order to distract the media before they moved his actual body. The question is whether or not he's really dead. I will say this. I'm sure you've seen the reporting that in the emails, his YouTube username and account is listed in some of those emails. And then someone found that there's a Fortnite account that has the same username and is linked to that YouTube. And apparently that Fortnite account has been active, and someone has been playing Fortnite on that account for the last few years, even as recently as this year, and that person geographically is located in Israel. Now, I have not been able to personally vet all of that, but there's a lot of discussion about that online. To me, because if you find the electronic footprint nowadays, to me, that's probably the best evidence, if there is any, that he's probably alive. Finding something, even if it might feel innocuous, as innocuous as that, to me feels like there could be something to it. More so than just, well, look, his nose in this picture is different than his nose in this picture. When you start to find that those kinds of traces, if I was investigating it, which I am, as you are, that gets my attention more than the rest of it does. The idea that someone has a user account that's been active, and we know, again, from different correspondence and emails, that Jeffrey Epstein was an avid Fortnite player, which is kind of bizarre to me also, but apparently he was. So the fact that that account is active right now and in Israel, where the rumors have been for some time that he's located, I find it to be pretty compelling. So we're actually looking into that, but that one's difficult, right? Because how do you actually prove it one way or the other?
Yeah, I agree.
So look, Mario, I know we're kind of short on time. We're going to kind of scrap the questions, but from the crowd, we'll do it next time. I do have a question for you tonight, though, and we're going to change subjects just slightly. I want to ask you, before we go, there's a lot of talk tonight about Iran, about the likelihood, possibility of the U.S. going to war with Iran. Chuck Schumer, just a few minutes ago, came out before the State of the Union. He had a briefing, and that Gang of Eight had a briefing, and he said it's very serious stuff. The president needs to make his case to the American people. I got to tell you, the idea that we're going to go into another Middle East war blows my mind. I think it would for a lot of people who believe that this president, just a couple of years ago was saying we got to get the warmongers out of D.C., get them out of the White House. The idea that we would have another Middle East war, and one with a country like Iran, I think is staggering. But I want to know your thoughts on that, and what are you thinking tonight?
Yeah, that one scares me. Look, I hope we don't see a war. I made a tweet saying that a war would be great politically because it's the best distraction to the Epstein files. But I think it goes well beyond the Epstein files. A decision like this goes beyond, just being a distraction. Iran is a population of almost 100 million people. It's a massive country. It borders a lot more countries. It has a lot of separatist movements. I think if we see strikes, U.S. strikes on Iran, that would be worrying, but we've seen that before. We've seen Israeli strikes, a 12-day war as well, and that ended, with relative peace in other countries around Iran. Even Iran recovered relatively quickly. Israel recovered very quickly. Now, what worries me is the purpose of the war. If the war is to force Iran to concede on their nuclear program, then I'm not that worried. I think Trump will be very strategic there. It'll be precise strikes, and he has a massive military buildup, the biggest in over 20 years, mainly as a negotiating tactic. So Iran folds quicker to avoid further damage. But if the purpose of the war is regime change, which is what Israel would love to see, Iran ending up like Syria and Libya, then the region is screwed. I think Gulf countries are very against this, and I think they'll continue being against this. That's why we saw for the first time ever, the US today sent fighter jets to Israeli territory for combat missions. And that's the first time this happened. Usually when there's fighter jets, American fighter jets in Israel, it's purely for training. And that's a signal to Iran and the rest of the world that we'll do this with or without the Gulf countries, with or without their support. And if it is regime change, then we're screwed because there is no leading opposition figure. There's Reza Pahlavi, but he doesn't have that much support in Iran. He hasn't been in Iran in decades. And the regime has done such a great job in systematically ingraining themselves within all aspects of the country, that being able to replace them, and even though they're very unpopular, they still have diehard fans. And all the incentives within the business world, the political world, the oil and gas sector, all the sectors are aligned to keep the regime alive. So if you destroy that, the entire economy will be destroyed. The entire society will end up a failed society like we saw in Syria, like we saw in Libya. And if you look at Syria and Libya today and what they were before the civil wars, it is beyond heartbreaking. And as much as I hate the Iranian regime, I've been very critical of the Iranian regime. I worry for Iranians, even though they want to see the fall of the regime, because they really don't know what they're in for. And there is no plan. There is no plan. If this is a regime change operation, there's no alternative to the regime change. And that is a catastrophe. I just would be very surprised if we see one, but I've been surprised a lot in the last year. I've been very surprised because Trump has spent his entire administration trying to be the peace president. doing more than any other president, or more than Biden when it comes to Ukraine, and jumping at every opportunity to reach a peace deal, whether it's between Congo and Rwanda, or between India and Pakistan, etc. He's been good at it. Obviously, Gaza is a perfect example of him trying to achieve peace. For him to throw all that in the rubbish and declare war, a full blown war on Iran, I would revisit my entire view of how the US administration works and who really calls the shots, because that would not be in America's best interest whatsoever.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think, for whatever force is driving him in this direction, I hope he can resist it, because I think Trump has an opportunity to have a real legacy. And if he does this, I think it'll destroy his legacy. I think he'll get bogged down into a war that he does not realize he's not going to just be able to get out of. Maybe he'll shock everyone and just do like a quick operation like they did, last year, where they just drop a bomb and leave. Maybe that's the case. But, if U.S. service members are killed, if you're fighting a country that has long-range, medium-range missiles, supersonic missiles, apparently the Iranians are now buying from the Chinese. So it's this is not the Iraq war of 20 years ago. It's very different.
I think what we'll see, if you ask me to speculate, we will see strikes. I think the goal will not be regime change. Trump is not crazy, but I think it will be kind of an escalation ladder where he starts striking certain targets. Will be decapitation strike initially, and then focusing the IRGC, then the rest of the military, because you've got two militaries in Iran, the infrastructure, the oil and gas infrastructure. He'll slowly escalate until Iran folds and concedes, because at the same time, Iran is being very hardline about this. They're not, rightly or wrongly, you can make that argument, but they're not accepting to concede, putting the ballistic missiles aside on their nuclear program. They do want the nuclear program, I think, it's as a deterrence. And they see this as existential for them. And for Trump to force them to concede, I think he'll continue escalating on that ladder. But my worry is, if they continue not conceding and he continues escalating, then what? When you reach that last step, what happens then? That's what worries me. But I really hope this is all a bluff. If it is a bluff and a deal is reached, that is one hell of a bluff. Probably the strategically an incredible win for Trump, if that's the case. So this could either end up being a massive catastrophe or an incredibly impressive win. I don't think there's a middle between the two.
Wow. Well, let's hope for the incredibly impressive win. Mario Nawfal, man, it's so great to talk with you. You've been generous with your time with us, so we appreciate you so much. Keep up the amazing work, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, man.
All right, guys, thanks so much for being with us. Listen, again, we apologize for those of you who were on Spaces. We weren't able to get that technology working correctly. But next time, we absolutely will. We're trying to do these at least weekly so we can do these live streams with you, simultaneously do the Spaces, along with having on terrific guests like Mario. And again, you need to follow him. If you're not following Mario on X, follow him, Mario Nawfal. Great stuff, brilliant guy, and he's doing an incredible job. And I will see you next time for our next Spaces live stream. Have a great night.